Hello, everybody, and welcome to our podcast series where we explore ways to support and empower youth in leading healthier lives. I'm MacDonald, and I'll be your host for this journey into topics that matter to today's youth. In each episode, we'll dive into discussions about physical health, mental well-being, professional development, and more. Our goal is to provide valuable insights, tips, and inspiration to help you live your best life. Through interviews with experts and practical advice, we aim to equip you with the tools needed to make positive choices and create a healthier future. So whether you're looking to become healthier, manage stress, or navigate your path to professional success, join us as we embark on this empowering journey together. Get ready to live well and thrive, one episode at a time. Welcome to the Live Well podcast series, empowering youth to live healthier lives. I'm your host, MacDonald, and in today's episode, we dive into a topic that needs attention and compassion: substance use among youth, with our guests, Jessemen and Mark Gauthier. Jessemen is the Executive Director, Mental Health and Addictions with Health PEI. She came to the island in spring 2022 after 16 years with the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction in Ottawa. Rebecca's current priorities include the development of the new Mental Health and Addictions campus and supporting access to evidence-based care for substance use. And Mark Gauthier is a social service worker with our provincial youth mental health and addictions program called Strength. Over his many years of employment with Health PEI, Mark has held many roles within addiction services, including with extended care services in our men's recovery homes and acute services at Inpatient Withdrawal Management. He has been with the Strength program since its inception in 2010. Mark is also a person living in long-term personal recovery from addictions and mental wellness and has been clean and sober since January 5th, 2000. Today, we'll uncover the underlying factors, shed light on effective prevention strategies, and discuss the importance of support systems and empathy in addressing this issue. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
How do you two think the landscape of substance use among youth has evolved in recent years? And what emerging trends are you observing?
Sure. So maybe I'll start high level and just speak to some of what we're seeing on a population level.
Sure.
And I think it's really important to keep in mind that despite some of the changes around some of the higher risk substances that we're going to dive into, we need to recognize that alcohol remains the most prevalent substance used among both youth and adults. So it's really easy to get caught up in the conversation about illicit substances, but we do need to keep in mind that alcohol use continues to be of great concern and is primarily responsible when we see things like emergency department visits among youth. Certainly a trend that's changed a lot over the years has been smoking, though. And one of the concerns that we're seeing now is the increased rate of vaping among youth. After we had seen what had been a very promising decline in tobacco use.
Well, I think some of the different trends that we're seeing from our level, and obviously we're intensive inpatient treatment, so we're talking on a general level here. So I have to try to remember to keep my comments not only just to my lane, but also to what we see from a place that by the time our clients reach here, they're at a significant risk level from substance use. Right. So we're talking in a general way today. But again, what we see is a lot more things, the availability of certain things, right? With technology, for example, you know what I mean? Dark web markets, for example, and being able to go online with yours or your parents' credit card and order basically whatever drug you want or what supposedly whatever drug you want to your mailbox or your PO box, right? So there's that danger in the whole side of things. Not that illicit substance use was ever a safe practice whatsoever, but we're starting to notice trends like these things, right? And as far as the availability of certain types of cannabis products as well, right? Like when the cannabis was on the black market, specifically, maybe you knew a drug dealer and you go buy some weed from him. Nowadays, there are so many products, from sodas to candies to all of these different things that people try their hardest, or so they say, to make these not appealing to youth, but it's hard for them not to be. Not everybody enjoyed smoking the ganja, but people, if they can get that high from something that they enjoy, it makes it a lot more easily kind of palatable, I think.
Right. So what I'm hearing is that while there's still a lot of issues stemming from more traditional drug and alcohol use, like nicotine, and alcohol as well. There's still a lot more availability for other drugs that were not really seen a couple of years ago, and drugs that were seen a couple of years ago as well, due to some, general legislative changes on PEI and in Canada as well.
It's important to recognize too, as Mark said, around the higher risk use and the unpredictability of what we're seeing in the market right now, just really increasing levels of toxicity, and that increases the risk of very harmful effects, including overdose. Mm-hmm. So, what that tells us is the need to really be clear in the messaging that we're providing around harm reduction and safer use for those who are using in a higher risk way. And also for those around them. Education on how to recognize and respond to overdose is more important today, I think, than it ever has been.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of education, have you guys seen any preventative measures and or educational strategies that are proven effective in reducing substance use among adolescents?
It's a broad question, and it involves a whole lot of different things. So as far as it's hard to put one approach to something so complex as the reasons that people may or may not choose to use or become harmfully involved in substance. So it's a multidisciplinary thing. And I think it involves a whole lot of us as services working together, right? And that's one of the big first and foremost things, is that everybody kind of being on the same page and the same team with our approach, which, as Rebecca stated, harm reduction has to be at a high level, and it has to be viewed for the very helpful tool that it is. And as far as any one specific from nowadays, there are many different things. I mean, we have different things within service. We have youth and family counselors specifically within service that can kind of meet people where they're at, and talk about, any questions that they have regarding substance use in somebody. And it doesn't have to be like a family, like the role of a youth and family counselor. It could be different caretaker that's non-familial. It could be with close friends who want to be supports to that person, bringing that whole team together to be able to support the individual in their decisions around substance use, I think is an important piece too.
Mm-hmm. Rebecca, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I love the message that Mark gave about everybody having a role to play in prevention and education. I think that's so true. And when it comes to prevention and education messaging, it's never too early to start. Some of the greatest impacts that we've seen are, in fact, in parenting projects. So, even before the individual is born, setting them up so that the family has the skills needed to provide a positive environment, because those early childhood experiences are so important in setting people up with the resiliency and the coping skills and the trust and the positive adult mentors that can really make a difference. When we talk about some of the targeted education and prevention messaging, some of what we know is that messaging has to be relevant. It has to be fact-based and accurate, not exaggerations, not, the over the top, but messaging that youth can really relate to and that they can see reflected in their day-to-day experiences. So it has to be honest, open conversation in a relatable way, where people have the opportunity to ask questions, to share their own experiences without fear of being judged. And the consistency too that Mark mentioned is really important too, so that youth are hearing that consistent evidence-based messaging from multiple sources, particularly when we know that Google is probably the primary source of information they're getting. And we certainly can't rely on the information that comes up from a Google search on being relevant. So I'd also put a plug in for the importance of working with youth to develop critical analysis skills for the information that they are getting off sources like the internet.
Mm-hmm. That's been a big topic in education as well. It's just general critical thinking. How do we improve that? I love what you guys said about modeling. That is super important. We talked about that in a previous podcast, multiple episodes now at this point, how important it is for the older people around youth, people who are directly influencing them, to have these habits and to show that in their life as well. So I think that's very important to mention here. Love that topic. Let's move on to some of the psychological factors influencing substance use. Can you guys discuss any psychological factors that might influence a youth to experiment with different substances?
So we did some great studies on this in my former role with the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, and particularly during COVID. And what we heard were that youth were really turning to substances like cannabis because they were bored. So really just looking for something to do. It could be as a coping mechanism, so coping with stress or strain or emotions. It could be simply for recreational purposes. I mean, we can't overlook the fact that people are looking for different ways to have fun, and substance use can be a part of that. And some of that is just being exposed to different substances through the peer group.
I want to know what you two think about how much influence peer pressure has on youth as they age. Uh, when does it influence them the most? Does it affect more when they're younger and they're like late teens, or when they're in their early 20s, or does it have an end date?
I think, to speak from a personal perspective, to take that route on this one, would be, I think my most peer pressure driven ages would be about junior high school age. I think at that time, peers' opinions become very important above even some of the responsible adults in my life and stuff, that I really have had a point that I felt more of a need to be kind of, I guess, just a part of that peer group, you know? And so that for me personally was around the age where things really started to take off too, you know? And I think that we will influence, you know, what we spend the most time around, we will become, essentially, right? So
Yeah.
if you spend time around really successful, healthy people, the chances of you becoming successful and healthy are very good. And if you spend a lot of time with people who are doing things that might not be as productive or as healthy, then those things can start to seem pretty normal too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I found those ages people tend to be more, but I might be a little biased too, based on my personal life experience as well. Maybe Rebecca can speak to some more of the stats around that.
Yeah, your life experience is very valuable, especially for this podcast. We're very happy to have it. But I was also curious, yes, Rebecca, did we see more of an increase in the coping and the coping use of certain substances, or and just even to fight boredom in older ages or younger ages whenever you were doing your research?
So unfortunately, the age breakdown didn't speak to that level of specificity. So I don't want to speak out of turn and be incorrect in terms of what the data tell us. But I do want to go to a comment that Mark made about we tend to adopt the behaviors that we see around us or that we perceive as normal around us, because we often focus a lot on what's wrong and don't focus on strengths. That strength-based approach and normalizing a healthy lifestyle can be so important. So we know that 23%, there was a recent school study, the Compass survey, that indicated that 23% of students in grades 7 to 12 on PEI reported using alcohol in the past 30 days. But that means 75% didn't, right? And that's the majority. So when we talk about what's normal, what's actually normal is not consuming alcohol. So letting youth know that, they're a good response to peer pressure is, if they're in a social group where that's all that they see, it's important to let them know that maybe that's not the norm across the rest of the student population. So when they think that everybody else is doing it, the fact of the matter is they're not.
Yeah, evidence-based, right? Things that are stating the facts rather than what we assume to be the case, or what we're afraid of, what we think might be happening based off of certain trends.
Absolutely.
In your experience, how does the evolving nature of substances affect the preventative measures that can be implemented?
I think, again, there's so much information out there, perhaps, as Rebecca related to earlier with the whole Google generation, you know what I mean? That people are going to kind of go to these places for information and take them as fact, right? So that's really evolving, is that what TikTok says is more true than reading a study by, a doctor of something or other. People aren't going to take the time to be like, okay, well, let's look at what the facts say and let's look at what the study. And they really are kind of focusing now on that very quick and dirty little snapshot of things. And, so from there, it's less likely that people get proper information, I believe, you know what I mean? Or get the full picture, perhaps nowadays, of everything that's happening.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of nuance in a 15-second long TikTok rather than like a 15-page paper from
Or a
somebody who
TED Talk,
studies.
for example, right?
Yeah, exactly. What do you think, Rebecca?
Yeah, I'd echo that. And I go back again to just the increasing toxicity of the illegal drug supply really does highlight the importance of harm reduction information, recognizing that some youth will use in higher risk ways and making sure that they have the knowledge that they need to stay as safe as possible. So that's things like never consuming substances alone, starting with very small quantities, making sure that somebody has an naloxone kit, and just making sure that people know how to use naloxone kits effectively and recognize and respond to signs of overdose. One interesting thing with cannabis legalization, one of the purposes of legalization was to enable us to better educate everybody, and particularly youth, about cannabis use, and to speak more openly about it as a substance and about the risks and harms associated with the substance. And the research definitely tells us that youth are at the greatest risk of experiencing harms, whether that's related to brain development or simply being less aware of use with the different formats of cannabis that Mark spoke to earlier in terms of higher levels of potency, with the edibles that are coming on. The experience is very different in terms of the delayed impact. So people who are perhaps used to smoking a joint or expect to have that immediate impact, there's a greater risk of accidental overingestion. If you have one edible and 10 minutes later don't feel anything, you have another edible, and then 2 hours later when it all kicks in, you're on the floor and not in a good place. So educating people about some of what does higher concentration of THC mean, and what to look out for in terms of the experience and when you might be having a bad experience, and what some of the risks are. We know that we're seeing accidental ingestion by very young people because of unsafe storage, and that's resulted in a considerable increase in emergency department visits, which is definitely concerning. And also we're seeing association between cannabis use and psychosis. So we know that the use of cannabis, and particularly higher THC cannabis, can be a trigger for experiencing psychosis for those who have a risk. So, if you have had an episode of psychosis in the past, or if you have close family with a history of psychosis, you really should not be using cannabis. You're in a very high risk category.
Yeah, that's something that we also talked about in my previous episode as well. And it definitely, this conversation definitely highlights the fact that this should be something people know about. These are lifelong effects that you can develop at a very young age just from being miseducated or just not knowing, because it's something that people don't talk about. So I'm glad this is something we can bring up on the podcast. Thank you very much for mentioning it. Are there specific support systems or programs designed to address the complexities of substance use across the spectrum?
I mean, I'd like to actually start out by giving a couple of shout outs to some community partners, we'll call them. I view us all in the same team, so there's lots of different people that are playing very valuable parts to this, and so from a community-based Peers Alliance is a big one that has always been huge on the harm reduction front. And they're always kind of coming out with best practice, harm reduction things, very inclusive, and just a wonderful group of people. We do lots of trainings with those guys. So they have a whole lot of information. So definitely check those guys out. NCPEI, or the Native Council, again, doing wonderful things around harm reduction and reducing stigma, which I think is super important, right? Because stigma is what keeps people from getting help or asking the questions that they might need in order to stay safe, because we don't want to be judged, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think that opening up those conversations about even uncomfortable topics for people, is very important in having everybody properly educated in saying, hey, this is the world that we all share, and here is the way that we're going to be able to best look out for one another, right? So I wanted to give those guys props for sure. Obviously, within Health PEI, we have our family counselors, like I'd mentioned before. We have youth and family programs like craft training for parents or support people, which kind of gets them speaking the language of recovery and talks about different things up to and including harm reduction strategies, right? To say, hey, some of the things that you might have thought about treatment from 10 years ago, from 15 years ago, here's how things are evolving, right? And here's how to best get on the same page and become an ally, as opposed to somebody who is just trying to say, hey, you need to do this or you need to do that. So we have a lot of these things that work very well. Like I said, us here, when people become harmfully involved with substance, and our community counselors have decided that, hey, we might need a little bit more of an intense intervention, then we assess and intake people who may be more harmfully involved in substance use or have had really adverse mental effects as a result of using substance. As Rebecca talked about, drug-induced psychosis, these sorts of things, can sometimes take a lot of time to work out. We see a lot of that sort of stuff. So we provide a lot of these services as well. As far as being an intensive inpatient treatment program, we don't do as much early intervention prevention just because our bread and butter is here at the intensive treatment stage. But we do, when we're asked, like to get out and talk to people and share our knowledge and let people know what's up as well.
Mm-hmm. Those are great. So Peers Alliance, Native Council, a couple other things were mentioned as well. On top of education, they also provide other services as well.
Oh, yes, I believe like these services, and I don't want to speak for somebody who is not me. So I just wanted to give those two guys real props, because I know sometimes they get flack from the public for some of the harm reduction strategies that they're doing, because people don't understand harm reduction and there's still a lot of stigma. But I just want to let them know that I see them and I appreciate them as a service provider, and I see the actual real work that's being done there. Right.
Yeah.
So I don't want to speak for either of those places, but definitely look them up. Again, back to the Google, right? Everybody has a web page nowadays. You can find them on any socials, those sorts of things. And they offer wonderful services to our communities, right?
Yeah. And on the topic of like them getting flack about people who don't understand harm reduction, I just want to state, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the goal of harm reduction in our system in general is just to keep everybody safe, right?
Absolutely. I mean, so
goal.
if you look at, say, from a parental perspective, it would be like, you don't want your children to drink alcohol, but would you rather them be comfortable enough to call for a drive home as opposed to feel stigmatized and get in a car with a drunk driver? Neither is a wonderful thing to have to figure out, but which one would you prefer? And any parent worth their weight is going to say, I'd rather them call me 10 times out of 10, regardless if you're drinking and I don't want you to drink or whatever. Our harm reduction approach is kind of the same thing. So it takes some of the harm out of a behavior that we might wish that people, and I can guarantee you that people that are using also wish that they weren't using. If there was a better way, they would probably take it 99% of the time, right? So how do we recognize that individuals are struggling and doing the best that they can, and give them the compassionate care that they deserve, right? So people around, say, needle exchange, for example, would say, oh, well, why are we giving these people needles? We're encouraging them to do drugs. They're going to use needles anyway. So if you find a needle in a park, stats show that if we hand out clean injection supplies, the needle that you find will have a lot less chance that it is infected with hepatitis C, HIV, any of these real nasty things. Nobody wants to find a needle. But if you do find it and there is harm reduction in play here, there's a lot less disease being spread around. If we don't have harm reduction, chances are that needle you just found in the park is full of AIDS or hepatitis, right? So if you look at it from that lens, it's like, okay, I'm still going to find this. Unfortunately, we don't want people discarding their needles. Please, if you're listening to this, discard in a proper way. Sharps container, all of these things. But we know that people aren't always going to do that. So harm reduction by providing clean supplies helps to prevent further harm, not just to the addict themselves, but the person who may accidentally stumble upon that rig or whatever that they find in public as well.
Right. Well, I appreciate the shout outs of all the services. I'm sure they appreciate it as well. Hey, the Peers Alliance Native Council, thumbs up for me. You can't see it, but thumbs up for me. Rebecca, do you have anything you want to contribute to this? Any specialized programs or support systems that you know of?
For sure. When we talk about particularly earlier prevention and education, building resilience and building coping skills are really important in terms of not just impacting substance use, but impacting your mental health, your likelihood for criminal justice involvement, your educational attainment. Like they're skills that go across the board. So any educational programs that do focus on the resilience, and the Alliance for Mental Wellbeing on the island has been doing a lot of training in ACEs, so recognizing adverse childhood experiences and the impact that those experiences have on the brain, and how to build back some of the supports and resilience that those adverse childhood experiences can take away from. So that's really valuable information and education for people who are providing services to have, so that they can provide, supports that are targeted to those individuals' needs. Certainly there's the, public health has the Live Well program that's just a, good source of information about substances and substance use. There's substance use education in the schools. Within Health PEI, Mark spoke about our community youth teams. So we do have youth counselors with all of our community sites across the island that can be accessed, and also student wellbeing teams that work out of the schools across the province. So certainly a lot of good work being done. And again, the community programs like Peers Alliance, it's not necessarily just about the specific programs targeting substance use. It's also providing alternatives. So going back to boredom as a reason for use. Are we giving people other things to do that are interesting, whether that's arts, recreation, sports, educational supports? So all of those community groups that are providing those alternatives and just supporting wellness as a whole are beneficial.
Definitely. This is a holistic system. It's just one part of our system, and everything is working towards that one goal of making sure everybody is safe. So this is great, guys. We had some great answers to some questions. Is there anything that either of you two would like to say that we didn't get to talk about on this podcast so far?
I think one thing I'd like to highlight is the value that you and the organization running this podcast bring. There's traditionally been a lot of work done about youth substance use that hasn't actually included youth. And including the youth voice and including your experience and your perspective is so important, because the youth know what's real and what's happening and what's going to resonate. And if it's a room full of adults trying to figure out what's going to work, the likelihood of success is considerably lower. So thank you for the work that you're doing.
Always, I'm just the guy behind the camera. It's no big deal at all. I appreciate that. That's the first person to compliment me on the podcast. This feels nice. I appreciate that. Mark, do you have anything you wanted to add to this?
I think, again, just to encourage people who may be feeling stigma to reach out, because from this end, you're not going to be stigmatized. You're not going to be judged. That's our promise and our guarantee to you as a health service. And as part of our mission statement, right, that you're going to find a very helpful person on the other end of that phone line, on the other end of that email, when you show up to our services in person, that there's never any judgment regardless of what's going to happen. So we used to do programming within the schools, and a lot of times our target audience would get missed. So all of the kids who we wanted to speak to, really, that kind of needed the message, would skip. And then at night, when we would do parent information sessions, we would end up with a room full of band parents. And thank you, band parents, for coming. We appreciate you. But not the highest risk group of adolescents as far as harmful substance use when we're talking about, and I know that a lot of people didn't come to those things because they felt like they would be judged, right? Now, my advice to anybody feeling like they have any further questions after hearing this is to simply reach out, and there'll be a friendly voice on the other end, and we can help to answer any of those questions. And if we don't personally have the answers, we're going to put you in touch with somebody who does.
Yeah, it's what you guys are there for. Your organization is reaching out to reduce as much harm as you can, keep people safe. That's what you want. There's no judgment there whatsoever, guys. So I'm just going to do a quick recap of some of the main points so far. A couple of things about evidence-based looking at the facts from evidence, it's important to note that alcohol and some more traditional drugs like marijuana and nicotine are still creating a lot of the lion's share of the issues we're seeing when it comes to admissions to emergency services and other medical institutions. Something else to keep in mind of is the ease at which things can be acquired because of new technologies. Education, modeling, building coping skills as the caregivers for young people is very important. Just we mentioned before, modeling is one of the most important things we've seen so far. If you are in care of a young person or if you're young person adjacent, modeling these habits are very effective. It's very effective to do that. Psychological factors like boredom can influence youth who are experimenting, same with what their peers are doing as well, depending on their age. And support systems. You are surrounded, whether you know it or not, by support systems that are willing to help you at a moment's notice. Just give them a call, search up on Google, make sure you go. You can use Google to find these places, but try to go through them because they have all the right information. And they want to give it to you because the goal here is to make sure that everybody is safe. Okay, I think that's a piecemeal recap of what we've talked about so far. Thank you guys so much for joining. We really appreciated all your expertise. We love we love the ability to share your word with hopefully our youth audience. Youth who are listening, anybody who's listening, I really want to really like if everybody would try to engage in prevention efforts and support any initiatives they see in addressing substance use, especially among youth, but substance use in general. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you.